The night wind swept across the Nevada desert, carrying with it a chill and the tang of rusted metal from ruins half buried in the sand. In the distance, the dark silhouette of an abandoned military facility loomed, a scar from an era when America buried its deepest secrets. In that place, silence was never complete. There were always faint sounds rising from beneath the earth. Whispers that blurred the line between wind and human voice. They say that anyone who stops to listen too long will never remain themselves. And once the sand has swallowed a secret, it never gives it back. The afternoon sun scorched the Nevada desert like a heated blade, slicing through every grain of parched sand. The old pickup truck rattled as it bounced along rugged trails, leaving behind a long plume of dust like smoke in the air. Inside were 4 figures. Jackson, the weathered treasure hunter, his eyes etched with fatigue. Claire, the young archaeologist clutching a bundle of old documents on forgotten test facilities. Miguel, the resourceful engineer who never let go of his toolbox. And Travis, the lanky local guide whose gait... They had come chasing a rumor. Hidden deep within the restricted lands near Area 51 lay an abandoned military depot, a place where technologies too dangerous to speak of had once been tested. Whispers claimed that somewhere inside was a piece of cargo, never meant to see daylight, something powerful enough to change the life of anyone who found it. For Jackson, it was a last chance to escape a trail of failed expeditions. For Claire, it was the lure of historical truth. For Miguel, it was simply a paying job. As for Travis, no one truly knew what he sought. The truck ground to a halt in a clearing between sand dunes, where rusted metal frames jutted out like the bones of some ancient beast. The stillness was so absolute that every breath seemed to echo in their ears. As the group advanced, Travis froze, tilting his head as if listening. "Hear that?" he murmured. No one answered. Only the hiss of wind scraping across the sand replied. Then Claire spotted it, a metal hatch half buried in the dune. It was as large as a bunker door, its steel surface scarred with scratches. When Miguel rapped it with his knuckles, the sound rang deep and hollow, accompanied by something stranger. A faint undertone, like whispers rising from below, uncertain whether it was mere echo or a human voice. The group fell silent. In the vast emptiness of the desert, quiet was no longer just quiet. Jackson tightened his grip on the flashlight, eyes locked on the darkness beneath the hatch. He knew every journey reached a point of no return. And they had just crossed it. Aye! Sand crunched underfoot as the group gathered around the steel hatch. Miguel gripped his crowbar and flashlight, sweat streaming down his face even though the sun had already dipped below the horizon. The screech of metal tore through the silence as rusted fragments flaked away. When the hatch finally gave, a rush of cold air surged upward, carrying with it a pungent odor. Half the dampness of earth long buried, half the acrid tang of scorched metal. Beneath lay a staircase spiraling into the earth. The flashlight swept across cracked concrete steps, their faded yellow warning paint peeling into nothing. Jackson led the way, each footfall echoing hollowly, as if the depths below were a vast, empty void. The stairwell opened into a corridor, pitch black, and stretching endlessly forward. On the walls were strange markings, smeared in faded red paint. Claire leaned closer, eyes gleaming with curiosity. Not English, not Latin either. Her voice trembled as she scribbled notes into her journal. They pushed deeper. Along the passageway, heavy steel doors lined the walls, most sealed with military padlocks. Some rooms lay open, filled with shattered machinery, charred cables, and broken metal tables. On the walls hung battered signs: Test Chamber 3, Containment, Access Restricted, all clawed and defaced, as though some unseen hand had tried to erase them. Travis was the first to halt. He stood frozen, head cocked, ear tilted toward the darkness ahead. "Don't you hear it?" he whispered, voice low and distant. The others exchanged uneasy looks. Only the faint hiss of wind seeped through cracks. But when they strained to listen, Jackson stiffened. From deep within the corridor came faint murmurings, a tangled chorus of voices speaking low. Too many, too indistinct to belong to any single language. Claire clutched her ears, her face pale. It's inside my head." They pressed on, the whispers growing sharper with each step. At the corridor's end, a massive circle loomed against the wall, a structure of metal fused into concrete, its surface etched with hundreds of symbols, part machinery, part incantation. Broken components jutted outward, exposing charred wires and blackened steel. Miguel stepped closer, pressing his hand to the surface. The metal was ice cold, but almost instantly he recoiled, gasping. I heard it. It said my name." No one had time to respond before the atmosphere shifted. The whispers swelled, multiplying. Dozens, hundreds of voices speaking all at once, rising from beneath the ground. Dust rained from the cracked ceiling, the floor trembling faintly as if something beneath was stirring. Jackson grabbed Claire and pulled her back, his heartbeat thundering in his chest. He realized then what they had done. This hatch had never been just a military door. It was a seal, and they had just broken it. For a single heartbeat, the voices fell silent. And then, in unison, they spoke one phrase that echoed through the corridor. "We can be heard again." The air in the bunker shifted sharply. Cold wind surged from the depths, carrying the stench of rotting earth and the metallic tang of rust. Flashlights flickered, and the darkness seemed to breathe. Jackson led the way, his steps heavy, weighted by dread. The whispers no longer came from afar. They pierced straight into his mind, calling his name in 100 voices. Men, women, children, all merging into a dreadful chorus. Claire trembled, clutching her notebook tight. Shadows in old military uniforms drifted past her, faces warped, eyes hollow, skin sagging like melting wax. They did not touch her, but the stench of scorched flesh churned her stomach. Suddenly, Travis halted, lips moving soundlessly. Jackson grabbed his arm, but Travis tore free, his eyes clouding over. "They are calling me. I belong to them." Miguel swung another flashlight beam into a nearby room. The floor was littered with rotting documents. He snatched a few still legible. Project Whisperer. Subject Failed Containment. Abort. Scattered among them were black and white photographs. Soldiers with blank white eyes, their bodies cracked and splitting, their skin dry as sand. At their feet was a red containment circle, annotated with, "Never break the seal." Then Travis laughed, a dry, rasping sound. Blood streamed from the corners of his eyes, his skin fracturing like shattering glass. A pale red glow pulsed beneath his flesh. When he lifted his head, his eyes blazed like twin shards of a blood moon. Claire screamed. Jackson seized her hand and pulled her away. Travis did not chase with footsteps. He glided, his voice echoing through the corridor walls. "Don't leave me. We are one." The three of them fled down the corridor, but space itself twisted. Paths spent, doors vanished, sand trickled from the cracking ceiling. Claire froze, staring at the walls. Dozens of human faces bulged from the concrete, lips moving in unison with the whispers. They writhed, then melted, leaving only swirling black hollows. Miguel suddenly clutched his chest, gasping. Black veins crawled across his skin, spreading like wildfire. He howled, but his voice warped, merging with the chorus. As Jackson tried to pull him, Miguel's skin flaked away like dried sand. His bones stretched unnaturally. Blood congealed into glistening black crystals. Miguel collapsed, his body reshaping into a half-human, half-sand monstrosity. Jackson let go, dragging Claire as they bolted forward. Behind them, Miguel's heavy, monstrous steps thundered, mingling with Travis's echoing laughter. They stumbled upon a skeleton in a tattered uniform, clutching a half-burnt journal. Jackson ripped it free, flipping through charred pages. The words that remained clawed at his mind. The seal holds only with intact blood sacrifice. If broken, the entity merges with earth and wind. Do not listen. But it was too late. The whispers consumed their thoughts, no longer just background noise, but woven into their veins, their breath, their heartbeat. Jackson knew that with every second, they were becoming part of the sealed entity itself. When he looked into Claire's eyes, he saw more than fear reflected there. He saw the vision of a barren desert, lifeless, endless, nothing left but wind, sand, and the eternal whispers. Nay. Travis's twisted laughter echoed through the bunker, blending with the heavy, monstrous footsteps of the deformed Miguel. Jackson pulled Claire forward, but the corridors bent and twisted endlessly, warping into impossible shapes. Their flashlight beams danced over walls crowded with countless faces of sand, all whispering in unison. A violent explosion cracked through the air. The ground beneath them split open, revealing a gaping chasm. From below surged a vortex of glowing red sand, swirling like molten blood. Hundreds of withered hands clawed upward, raking at the air, while mouths whispered together, "Stay. Feed us." Jackson and Claire clung to a rusted metal beam as the updraft roared, a wind so fierce it felt like it could strip the skin from their bones. Across the chasm, Travis appeared, his body fissured, his blood glowing crimson. He spread his arms wide, his voice thundering through the cavern. "You don't understand. This is the return. The entity only needs to open its eyes." And then he hurled himself into the vortex. His body shattered into 100 fragments, merging with the storm of sand. From the depths, a colossal pair of crimson eyes opened, forcing every gaze toward them. Jackson reeled as visions tore into his mind. Soldiers of a century past, setting themselves ablaze to seal the monster. Entire towns erased from maps to bury the secret. Claire broke down, sobbing, whispering, "We can't stop it." Grinding his teeth, Jackson dragged her toward a rusted doorway that had appeared in the wall. They stumbled through, collapsing into a chamber vast as an underground chapel. On its cracked stone walls stretched the remnants of a blood-drawn seal, fractured and fading. At the center lay a shattered altar, iron restraints still clinging to its edges. Claire whispered in awe and terror. This is where they imprisoned it." Suddenly, Miguel staggered in from the opposite entrance. His body was half man, half sand and bone, every step shaking the ground. But in his clouded eyes flickered a momentary spark of clarity. Miguel's voice tore through the chamber, ragged and thunderous. "Run! It will use me as the vessel." Then his body ruptured, exploding into a whirlwind of crimson sand that wrapped itself around the broken seal. Cracks spread wider, red light erupting upward, flooding the chamber in a blinding glow. Jackson clutched Claire tightly, his heart hammering. He knew the truth now. What had been sealed for centuries was awakening, and only they remained standing before it, drowned in the darkness, swallowed by the endless whispers. Yeah. The chamber shook violently, glowing red fissures spreading across the floor like massive veins. The whispers grew deafening, no longer faint murmurs, but thousands of voices screaming inside their skulls. Jackson collapsed to his knees, blood trickling from his ears and nose. Claire clutched his arm, her eyes bloodshot, her voice trembling. We can't escape. It needs a sacrifice. If not..." Chunks of ceiling crashed down. The seal on the floor split open, and from the cracks rose countless withered hands. In the heart of the crimson storm, a pair of colossal eyes widened, fixing on them. Each gaze seared their flesh, choking Jackson with agony. In the chaos, visions overwhelmed him. Soldiers willingly burning themselves in this bunker, their blood painting the seal. Villagers turning to ash to contain the entity. Generations burying the truth, all to prevent this moment. He understood. Blood was the key to closing the seal. The final blood had to be human. Jackson turned to Claire. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, don't. I can't lose you." A faint, weary smile crossed his lips. He pressed her trembling hands around the charred journal they had found. The last legible words burned into her vision. "When all else fails, a living heart may close the door." Before she could stop him, Jackson hurled himself into the fractured seal. Sand engulfed him, unseen claws shredding his skin, but he roared through the torment, forcing his bleeding hand down into the earth. A blinding red light flared. The whispers turned into shrieks of anguish, then faded into silence. The withered hands crumbled into dust, the seal glowing one final time before sealing shut. The chamber fell quiet. The wind from the abyss ceased. Claire collapsed, sobbing, staring at the empty space where Jackson had stood. Only red sand remained, silent, as though nothing had happened. She staggered out of the tunnels. Dawn was breaking over the desert. The sun rose, blood red against the horizon, but its light did not bring life. It only echoed the fire that had consumed him. And in the stillness of the morning, Claire heard it, the faintest sound beneath the sand. Not the wind, a whisper, familiar, dotty, persistent. It had not vanished. It had only gone back to sleep, waiting for another day. Wow! On the outskirts of New Orleans, hidden among oak trees draped in green moss, the old manor of Maison de Lune still stands, like a scar carved into time. They say that nearly a century ago, it bore witness to a wedding steeped in blood, when the bride, groom, and every guest perished in a night of unspeakable slaughter. Since then, on every full moon, those who dare to draw near swear they hear the wail of a violin and the echo of laughter spilling from its darkened windows. Inside, the celebration never ended. The bride and groom remain, but their faces are gone, and they are waiting for new guests to arrive. Oh. Lydia was a freelance journalist, known for chasing legends and folklore across the American South. New Orleans had always captivated her with its strange blend of voodoo, Catholicism, and the restless ghosts of its past. Yet among the many chilling tales whispered in the city's streets, none unsettled her quite like the story of the Maison de Lune estate. One night, Lydia slipped away from the French Quarter and drove toward the crumbling manor. The locals' warning still rang in her ears. On the night of the full moon, never go near Maison de Lune. But to Lydia, a taboo was nothing less than an invitation. She stepped out of her car, carrying only a flashlight and her worn notebook. When she pushed open the iron gate, a rush of cold air swept out, laced with the acrid tang of rust and the sweet rot of decayed flowers. She followed the broken stone path, each footstep echoing unnaturally in the silence. The closer she came, the louder her heartbeat seemed to thrum. The manor loomed like a corpse in hibernation, waiting for someone to rouse it. And Lydia, with her insatiable curiosity, had willingly become its caller. The air inside Maison de Lune was thick with dust, yet it echoed with sounds that did not belong to the present. Lydia stepped through the grand hall, where enormous mirrors once gleamed, but now lay dim and clouded. For a fleeting instant, she saw her reflection, blurred, indistinct, her face lacking detail. She staggered back, convincing herself it was only the moonlight distorting her image. Then suddenly, a violin began to play. The melody was distant yet sweet, drawn out like a wedding hymn. Lydia held her breath, listening. The music seemed to pour from the ballroom. When she pushed the door open, the sight before her froze her blood. The room glowed with unnatural light. Chandeliers, heavy with dust, blazed with golden fire. Hundreds of figures in 19th century attire glided across the floor in elegant waltzes, their movements silent, their footsteps soundless. But the horror lay in their faces, blank, featureless, like masks never carved. At the far end of the room stood the bride and groom. The bride in stark white, the groom in jet black. Neither bore a face. Instead, where their features should have been was a dark void, a hollow that pulled at Lydia's gaze like a black hole. Suddenly, an unseen guest pressed a glass into her hand. She flinched, dropping it. The red liquid inside splattered across the floor like blood, but in seconds, it vanished, leaving the stone spotless, as though it had never been. The violin fell silent. In that instant, every faceless gaze in the ballroom turned toward Lydia. Auntie. The ballroom froze. Lydia felt as though she had misstepped in an endless waltz, her body out of place in a ritual that had never stopped. The faceless guests had no eyes, and yet she felt them staring, every inch of her skin prickling under their gaze. The orchestra resumed, but the music was no longer sweet. It was shrill, discordant, a cacophony that rattled her bones. The dancers moved again, but their steps were stiff, jerking like marionettes pulled by unseen strings. One guest drifted toward her, lifting her hand as though inviting her to dance. She recoiled, trembling, but its grip was ice cold, the texture hard as bone. Lydia lifted her eyes, and the blank void where its face should have been split open. From the fissure, dozens of skeletal hands clawed outward, raking at the air. Laughter erupted, rolling across the room from every direction, though she could not tell which mouthless figure it belonged to. In the cracked mirror along the wall, Lydia saw her own reflection, yet her face was gone. In its place stretched a smooth, featureless expanse of white. Panic surged. She stumbled back, but another hand clamped down on her shoulder. The bride, her white gown dragged across the floor, stained with sprawling rust-red streaks. The faceless bride leaned closer, her hollow visage a void that threatened to swallow Lydia whole. The music swelled to a fever pitch. The orchestra, those faceless musicians, revealed their secret horror. Their faces had not been lost. They had been stripped away, dangling like masks from the very instruments they played. Each tortured note bled from human flesh. Lydia tried to scream, but her voice died in her throat. The faceless hand reached up, pressing against her cheek, clammy, wet, and unyielding. The sensation was unbearable, her skin stretching, tugging, ready to be torn away. Nyaha, inchadi. The violins shrieked, splintering the air like hundreds of knives clawing at her eardrums. Lydia collapsed onto the ballroom floor, her ears ringing, vision swimming. Yet the scene around her only grew sharper, more grotesque. The faceless guests began to peel away their coverings. One, then another, then dozens. Beneath the white veils were stitched together faces, black threads holding scraps of skin that had never belonged to them. Some faces hung loose, half-attached, exposing the bruised flesh beneath. When they laughed, the sound poured from hollow cavities, echoing like wind howling through crypts. On the banquet table, the towering wedding cake split apart, oozing thick, dark red fluid that stank of rot. Wine glasses filled on their own, brimming with viscous, metallic liquid that sloshed over the rims. Guests raised their cups in unison, toasting, as blood splattered across the white tablecloth. At the center of the room, the bride and groom drifted forward. Their garments, white gown, black suit, fluttered as though gravity no longer applied. They extended their hands toward Lydia, beckoning her to join the wedding. But Lydia knew this was no invitation. It was a sentence. The room convulsed. Doors slammed shut. Candles erupted into flames. Shadows swarmed across the walls like 100 grasping hands. The orchestra changed its tune. No longer a waltz, but the slow, crushing march of a funeral dirge. The violins screamed, no longer instruments, but the cries of souls bound into their strings. A new row of seats appeared, draped in blood-red cloth, reserved for fresh guests. Lydia's breath caught. She saw familiar faces, Marcus, Jonah, stripped of every feature. They sat stiffly, lifeless, hands on their knees, puppets awaiting command. Their flayed faces now hung nearby, ready to be grafted onto the musicians. "No, this isn't real," Lydia whispered, but her voice dissolved beneath the monstrous symphony. The bride raised her hand. Two faceless attendants clamped down on Lydia's shoulders, forcing her to kneel in the center of the hall. A shredded bridal veil dropped over her head, suffocating her in damp darkness. The drumbeat pounded like a colossal heart, pressing the air from her lungs. Then came the final rite, the giving of the mask. The faceless groom approached, holding a human face still dripping fresh blood. The skin mask sagged, eyes clouded, lips pale. Lydia froze in horror as recognition pierced her, Jonah's face. She screamed, thrashing, but the iron-cold hands held her fast. The mask was lowered toward her own, warm blood pattering down her neck. She felt her skin stretch, tug, as though ready to be flayed and replaced. The wedding bells rang 3 times. The whole roared in unison, a ragged chorus chanting, "Welcome, the new bride." In that moment of terror, Lydia understood the most dreadful truth. This wedding would never end. It always hungered for more brides, more grooms, more guests. And now it was her turn. The veil smothered Lydia, suffocating her with its weight. Wedding bells tolled, each peal twisting into the shriek of violins scraping bone. Faceless hands clamped down on her shoulders, forcing her head upward. The groom raised Jonah's blood-slicked face, ready to fuse it to the emptiness where her own should be. In that instant, Lydia saw herself reflected in the mirrors lining the hall. Dozens of them. In each one she was someone else, clad in a bridal gown, seated among the faceless orchestra, twirling without features across the dance floor. Each reflection stared back at her with hollow eyes, each future the same, an endless prison with no escape. The guests erupted in laughter. The veil was torn away, and Lydia found herself draped in a white gown. A moment ago she had worn her worn jacket. Now the dress hung heavy, sodden with blood. The former bride was gone. Lydia now stood in her place. The faceless groom clasped her hand. The touch was colder than ice, and with it surged a poison that spread through her veins. Lydia tried to scream, but no voice came. Her lips moved soundlessly, though somewhere nearby violin strings sang, echoing her every motion. The orchestra roared, and the wedding feast resumed. The faceless guests whirled, spinning around Lydia and her new groom. Blood streamed across the marble floor, yet they glided over it as if it were polished glass. Each step left a red imprint that fractured into cracks, spidering through the stone. Through the haze, Lydia clung to a single thought. If I must stay, I will remember. She tried to hold on, to the music, to the stitched faces, to the laughter scraped raw. But memory itself dissolved, slipping away like mist on the wind. She no longer remembered her name. She no longer remembered why she had come. There was only the wedding. There was only the endless dance. Outside, the full moon bled red across Maison de Lune. Inside, the celebration endured, a faceless bride and groom presiding over an orchestra of stolen flesh. Laughter, music, and bells blended into a grotesque symphony. From time to time, neighbors on the outskirts of New Orleans swore they heard it. The distant waltz, the clinking of glasses, the muffled invitations of voices without faces. They barred their doors, avoiding the road that led to the manor. Yet, curiosity always claimed some. Footsteps always wandered too close, and each time, the feast grew louder. The orchestra swelled. Maison de Lune never sleeps. It hungers for guests. And Lydia, forever veiled in her blood-soaked gown, smiles an invisible smile, bound to the faceless wedding symphony, forevermore. Kenna, K. At the edge of a small Midwestern town, the decaying church of St. Aurelia still loomed over a field of wild grass. They said that more than a century ago, the villagers knelt within its frigid nave and struck a covenant with the devil to escape famine. Each soul offered was sealed inside a candle, and the altar became an orchestra of silent screams. Though the church has long been abandoned, whenever the wind cuts across the plain, a faint yellow light still flickers through the shattered windows. And people believe that if a foolish hand ever dares to spark a flame again, the covenant will rise. And whoever lights, it will never leave hope. Ali, wow. Nathaniel pulled his car to a stop along the muddy road, his eyes fixed on the massive shadow rising from the field of wild grass. St. Aurelia Church. The stonework lay in ruins, its roof collapsed in jagged gaps, yet it still radiated a grim, funereal majesty. He opened the door, and the early autumn wind rushed in, cold and damp, carrying the scent of mildew and rust. Nathaniel was a scholar of folk religion. He had heard dozens of rumors about St. Aurelia, where, long ago, the villagers forged a dark covenant in exchange for survival. Most dismissed the stories as superstition, but he did not. In an old library in Chicago, he had unearthed a tattered manuscript that spoke of the breathing candles of this very church. From that moment, obsession clung to him, driving him here. Stepping through the rotted wooden doors, Nathaniel felt at once that the air had thickened, as if he were stepping into the chest cavity of some colossal beast. Each breath grew heavy, each footstep stretched into echoes that refused to die. He swept his flashlight across the nave. There, on the altar, dust lay thick, except for the faint marks of fingers pressed recently into its surface, withdrawn in haste. A gust of wind tore through the church, the doors groaning. And for an instant, Nathaniel was certain he saw a faint glow at the far end of the nave. He blinked, and darkness returned. His heart pounded. Nathaniel drew out his recorder, his voice whispering into it. St. Aurelia, Day 1. I can feel a presence here, and I believe the candles remain, waiting to be lit. Behind him, the darkness seemed to whisper back, soft and sibilant, in a tongue that did not belong to man. No. Nathaniel moved deeper into the nave, his flashlight sweeping across damp, moss-cloaked walls. The air grew heavier, choked with mildew and the acrid tang of old ash. He stopped at the altar, brushing a hand across the thick blanket of dust, then froze. A rustling noise echoed from the far end of the church. His chest tightened. The beam jerked wildly. A shape darted between the ruined pews. Who's there? Nathaniel's voice cracked, trembling against the silence. The shadow suddenly lunged forward. Nathaniel staggered back, pulse hammering, nearly dropping his light. The beam caught a face, haggard, familiar. Eyes bright, hair unkempt, a camera swinging from his neck. Eli? Nathaniel gasped, scarcely believing. The other man stiffened, then let out a shaky laugh. Nathaniel? Christ, I thought you were something else. The tension eased for a heartbeat, though the dread clung stubbornly around them both. Eli Turner, an old friend, once a fellow traveler on field expeditions, was here, inside the rotting shell of St. Aurelia. What are you doing here? Nathaniel asked, voice low. I could ask you the same. Eli raised his camera and snapped a photo. They say this place is haunted. I figured I'd see if my lens could catch anything strange. Didn't expect to find you chasing whatever dark faith you're still obsessed with. Nathaniel didn't answer. He only gestured at the altar. Do you see it? The wax stains, They've never really gone out. Eli frowned, half skeptical, half uneasy. But before he could reply, a sharp crack rang out, like flame catching a wick. A faint, sickly glow flickered across the altar. A lone candle shivered into flame, though Nathaniel knew he had not touched it. Shadows stretched long and jagged across the ruined walls. Eli lowered his camera, his face gone pale. You see it too? Yes, Nathaniel whispered. Wind shrieked through the broken windows, splintering into a chorus of whispers. They swirled around the two men, hundreds of voices rising and falling in a tongue that did not belong to this world. Every syllable scraped at their skin, raising gooseflesh. Eli gripped Nathaniel's shoulder. We should get out, now. But Nathaniel shook his head, his eyes alight with fevered conviction. No, Eli. This is the proof. The covenant never ended, don't you see? They sealed their souls into these candles. The single flame flared violently, casting light across cracked walls. Within those fissures, Nathaniel thought he saw faces, dozens of them, pressed against the stone, their mouths moving soundlessly. Eli turned away, hands trembling around his camera, no longer daring to press the shutter. Silence thickened. Then came the sound of wax dripping, tick, tick, like blood falling onto the cold stone floor. Eli edged back. Nathaniel, if you still have any sense left, we should leave before... His words cut off. The entire nave erupted in light. Dozens of invisible candles roared into flame, their jaundiced glow painting the fractured ceiling. In that glow, shapes coalesced, pale figures lining the central aisle, standing as though in a funeral procession that had never ended. Nathaniel clutched his recorder tight. Eli swallowed hard, eyes wide in horror. Both men knew in that instant they were no longer observers. They had become unwilling guests at a ritual that had never ceased. Now, the jaundiced glow of dozens of candles filled the nave. Their light gave no warmth. Instead, it chilled Nathaniel to the marrow, as though he were standing inside a morgue. Eli gripped his arm tightly, eyes wide, no longer curious but stricken with absolute terror. Along both sides of the aisle, hazy figures began to stir. They had no faces, only man-shaped husks wrapped in wax, chests hollowed inward, arms curled tight like melting effigies. Each movement cracked and splintered like brittle wood. One figure broke away from the front row. The flame on the altar candle bent toward it, as if feeding it with breath. Layer by layer, its skin peeled away, revealing a glistening, pulsing substance beneath. Nathaniel and Eli watched as the thing warped, flesh winding and knotting into the form of a living candle. Its arms stretched into waxen branches split with fissures, and from its mouth spewed molten wax, hissing as it struck the stone floor. Nathaniel's breath caught in his throat. Eli let out a strangled cry, stumbling back against a splintered pew. His camera slipped from his hands and shattered on the stone, forgotten. The flesh candle flared, a crimson flame erupting from its brow. Its light made the other figures quiver in unison, as though awaiting command. From its warped body came a groan, layered, 100 voices weeping at once from a single throat. "Oh God, oh God," Eli whispered, clutching Nathaniel's shoulder. But Nathaniel could not look away. Terror bound him, yet some dreadful fascination held him still. He listened and realized the groaning carried words. Not random sounds, but names. The names of Saint Aurelia's villagers, one by one, called from the dark. Another candle on the altar flared to life. A second figure stepped free, its skin cracking, wax pouring down its body. The stench of burning flesh rolled through the nave. Eli gagged, pressing his hand to his mouth to keep from vomiting. The whispers swelled, clearer now, their chant unmistakable. More to be lit. New blood for the light. Nathaniel fumbled for his notebook, scrawling frantic notes with a trembling hand. Eli snatched at it, hissing, "You're insane. This isn't something to record. It's something to escape." But before their argument could rise, the two flesh candles lurched forward. Beneath their feet, wax sizzled like acid, eating through the flagstones. A droplet spattered onto a fallen pew. Within seconds, the wood sagged into ash. "Run!" Eli screamed. They bolted down the narrow aisle, the sickly glow dogging their steps. Nathaniel slammed into a crumbling wall, his hand striking a small wooden door. Without a thought, he shoved it open. Both men tumbled inside and wrenched it shut behind them. The small chamber reeked of scorched wax, heavier than the air outside. Their breaths rasped in their throats, seared as though they had swallowed fire. Nathaniel's flashlight swept the room, then froze. Before them lay a circle of candles, dozens of them, encircling a stone altar. But these were no wax tapers. Each was a human finger, bone and flesh fused together, fingertips burning with steady red flame. Eli broke into sobs, voice trembling. "Nathaniel, this isn't a covenant. This is hell." Outside, fists pounded the door. The flesh candles had found them. The flames atop the altar suddenly roared skyward, illuminating ancient sigils carved into the walls, a curse that had never been broken. And in that moment, Nathaniel understood. They had not stumbled upon a relic. They had awakened a covenant that promised no escape. Yee! Footsteps thundered through the darkened church. Nathaniel dragged Eli forward, breath ragged, the stench of burning wax clinging thick in the air. Behind them, the wax figures dragged themselves across the floor, hissing softly like candles cracking as they melted. They burst into the confessional, only to see the walls splitting, wax seeping through like congealed blood. A hand seized Eli's shoulder. Nathaniel swung his flashlight like a club, shattering it, and pulled his friend onward. The nave yawned open before them, and the scene had changed. Every pew was filled with waxen shapes, all heads turned toward the altar. Upon it stood a single colossal candle, burning crimson, its light bleeding across the stone like liquid fire. Before it, a melting priest shape preached, voice booming against the fractured walls. The covenant has never ended. The flame must be fed with souls. The heat scorched their skin raw. The congregation of candles began to rise, staggering forward, limbs splitting, their bodies dripping foul black resin. Nathaniel clenched the drawings in his hand. The ink had bled scarlet, revealing a sigil of a broken candle beneath the altar. His mind reeled with clarity. The only escape was to shatter the seal. "The crypt beneath the altar!" he shouted, dragging Eli through the swaying throng. The wax creatures grasped at them, shells splitting, oozing a stench of rot and ash. At the altar's base, Nathaniel's palm found a hollowed stone. He pressed hard. The floor trembled, splitting wide to reveal a spiral staircase plunging into the depths. The priest's shape roared. From the great red candle lashed tendrils of molten wax, cracking down like whips, searing the air inches from their heads. Without hesitation, Nathaniel and Eli hurled themselves down the stairwell, heat pursuing like a living tide. Darkness thickened around them until, at the bottom, a monolithic stone door loomed. Carved upon its surface was the image of an inverted burning candle. From its fissures seeped the sound of countless voices, whispering, sobbing, cursing, begging. The door groaned as it began to open. A cold wind surged through, snuffing out the light behind them. Nathaniel felt the pull of inevitability. Beyond this threshold lay the true heart of Saint Aurelia, where the fate of the Covenant, sealed for centuries, would finally be decided. Hi, Ainsilins. The stone door shuddered open, and darkness surged out like a flood of ice. Nathaniel and Eli stepped inside, their hearts pounding in their chests. Beneath their feet, the floor was split with jagged fissures, from which oozed thick, red wax, like blood boiled into liquid. At the chamber's center rose a colossal candle, vast as an ancient tree. Its flame burned crimson, casting a sickly glow across the cavern. Around its waxen trunk were fused human forms, mouths frozen open, eyes dripping like molten wax, their bodies rigid yet trembling as though still alive. From them came low, overlapping moans, a grotesque chorus of suffering. Eli staggered back, voice trembling. Nathaniel clutched the drawing, the sigil of the broken candle glowing like a wound. He understood. This was the root of the Covenant. The blood candle, devouring the villagers' souls to fuel the sect's unholy power. As long as it burned, the ritual would never end. "We have to extinguish it," Nathaniel whispered, though his breath shook with fear. They stepped forward, but the priest's voice echoed from every wall, thick and dripping like wax. "None shall break the covenant. This flame is your blood." The monstrous candle flared, tendrils of red wax uncoiling and lashing down. They wrapped around Eli's legs, dragging him toward the trunk. He screamed, thrashing, but the wax was as unyielding as iron chains. Nathaniel lunged, pulling desperately, but the candle clutched tighter, hungrier. "Go!" Eli shouted, eyes wild with both terror and resolve. "You have to destroy it, even if I don't make it." Nathaniel shook his head, tears brimming, but Eli shoved him hard toward the flame. In that instant, Nathaniel understood. Only a final sacrifice could end it. Eli lifted his face, his eyes gleaming in the hellish red light. "End it." And then he let go, surrendering himself to the candle. His body was swallowed whole, the flame surging higher with a shriek that rattled the earth. The chamber convulsed. Nathaniel seized the moment. He tore the last relic from his pack, a flask of sacred oil scavenged from the archives, and hurled it into the heart of the fire. A deafening roar split the air. The blood candle screamed, fissures ripping through its body as imprisoned souls burst free, wailing in a torrent of cold wind. The light collapsed into itself, plunging the cavern into utter blackness. When Nathaniel awoke, he lay among the rubble, outside St. Aurelia. The night sky loomed above, moonless, silent. No Eli, no moans, only the crushing stillness of a grave. He staggered to his feet, his hands caked in hardened wax, a mark that would never fade. The crypt, the candle, all gone, along with Eli. But deep within the silence, he caught the faintest whisper riding the wind. The covenant is not finished. Nathaniel shivered. Somewhere, in the shadows of Appalachia, the blood flame still waited for another sacrifice to awaken it once more. Pixie.